I'm Bryce of the Cinder Archive, and this is Chapter 8, The Weight He Doesn't Carry. They'd watched a man's halting walk dissolve into fluid grace from 100 yards off, and decided, before a single word had passed between any of them and him, that whatever this job actually required, it wasn't going to start with a drawn blade. Senna would go first, and she would go gently, and the rest of them would follow her lead rather than their training. That was the plan, agreed on in whispers at the edge of Wren Hollow, while the lamps came up one by one along the lane. Plans, as a rule, survive contact with a frightened man rather less often than anyone making them would like to believe, and this is the chapter where they learn exactly how much less. There is a fight in this one, and it will end, the way fights against frightened, decent men so often end, with nobody satisfied, and nothing resolved quite cleanly enough to walk away from feeling like the heroes the posting promised they'd be. Edrin Marrow's cottage sits at the quiet end of the lane, modest and well kept in the particular way of a man who's had a long time to learn which repairs matter and which don't, herbs drying in fragrant bundles along one window, and a faint smell of liniment oil clinging to the doorway itself. A small kitchen garden runs along one side, neatly tended despite everything his body apparently costs him to manage it. A single lamp burns warm in the front window, the kind of ordinary domestic glow that makes the five of them, gathered at the edge of his little fenced yard, feel considerably more like intruders than any Sky Pirate's engine room ever managed to make them feel. This doesn't feel like the others, Tamsin says quietly, more to herself than to anyone as they settle into position. Voss's deal. Quill's ship. Even from here, this feels like walking up to someone's actual home. Because it is one, Orsa says. Through the front window, before the door ever opens, they can just make out the shape of the room beyond. A single chair pulled close to the hearth, a worn blanket folded over its arm, a shelf of small carved wooden animals that look handmade and well-loved, the kind of modest, accumulated clutter that belongs to a life lived alone, but not unhappily. It is, all of them notice, without quite saying so, nothing whatsoever like the lair of a man hoarding stolen weapons. They'd agreed on the walk over, Senna alone at the door, the rest held back near the fence line, close enough to help, if help became necessary, and far enough not to look like a siege the moment Edrin opened his eyes to them. Bram had argued briefly for a wider perimeter in case this went badly fast. If it goes badly, a wider perimeter doesn't help, Senna had said. It just means he sees more weapons sooner. I'd rather he sees one face and hears one voice for as long as that's possible. And if one face and one voice isn't enough, then we'll know that quickly enough, and you'll all be close. She looked at each of them in turn, the particular gravity she usually saves for things that actually matter to her. I want to try this honestly, not as a formality before the fight everyone already expects. If there's a version of tonight where nobody gets hurt, I want us to have actually looked for it before we decide it doesn't exist. Wick had said nothing to that, which from Wick was its own kind of agreement. Tamsin had simply nodded, already half distracted by the warm, unfamiliar pull she couldn't yet name coming from somewhere inside that quiet little cottage. Nobody had argued the point further, and so it stood. Senna first, alone, and whatever came after would come after. He's inside when she knocks. And the wait that follows, brief as it actually is, stretches long enough for every one of them to hear their own pulse in their ears. Senna spends the wait running through the words she'd rehearsed on the ride in, half of them already feeling wrong the closer she gets to actually needing them. We mean you no harm. True, and somehow already insufficient, standing on the stranger's doorstep with a sword at her hip and 4 armed companions at her back, however good their intentions. She breathes once, settles her grip on nothing in particular, and reminds herself, the way her oath mistress had taught her to years ago, before any of this had names attached to it, that the truth doesn't stop being worth saying just because it might not be believed. He opens the door without the armor on. It's a small thing, and it costs him visibly to manage it. One hand braced hard against the frame, his whole body canted at an angle that speaks of decades spent making peace with pain rather than fighting it, each breath audibly considered before he spends it on anything else. He's not old, not really. Maybe somewhere in his 5th decade, weathered in the way men who spent their lives in mines and mountains tend to weather. Close-cropped gray hair, hands scarred rough across the knuckles, a face that might have been quick to laugh once, and has simply forgotten the habit somewhere along the way. His body has clearly been asked to be older than that for years longer than it should have been. His eyes, when they find Senna's, are wary in the specific way of someone who has learned that kindness, too, can be a kind of trap. "You're not from Wren Hollow," he says. Not a question. "No," Senna says. "We've come a long way to talk to you, Eamon. Or Edrin, I should say. That's the name we actually have. We mean you no harm. I need you to hear that first, before anything else. People who mean no harm don't usually arrive in groups of 5. His gaze flicks past her to the others, cataloging weapons, with the quick, practiced thoroughness of a man who's had reason to learn how, lingering a beat longer than necessary on Bram's bulk before returning to Senna's face. "What do you want?" "There's armor. The kind that lets you move the way we saw you move tonight, by the well." Senna keeps her voice level, careful, every word chosen the way a person chooses footing on uncertain ground. "We've been sent to recover it. I won't pretend otherwise to you. That's the job, and I won't lie about what brought us to your door. But I'd rather talk first. I'd rather understand before anyone does anything that can't be undone." Something in his expression closes, slow and total, like a door settling into a frame it settled into many times before. "Understand what exactly?" His voice has gone flat, guarded, though there's exhaustion underneath the flatness rather than real heat. "That I can't carry a bucket from the well to my own door without it, without my back trying to fold me in half? That I spent 30 years underground earning a body that hates me for it, and one season with this armor has given me back more ordinary living than the previous 10 put together? Go on, understand all of that. It won't change what you're here to do. Help me understand the part before the armor then," Senna says, carefully. "How it happened. What it took from you before any of this found its way to your door." He studies her for a long moment, like he's deciding whether the question is a kindness or a tactic, and something in her face must satisfy him enough to answer it honestly. "Started young. Most miners' backs do. Down in the deep seams, you spend 20 years bent under low rock, and your spine simply forgets how to be anything else." He shifts his weight against the door frame, the motion costing him visibly even now. "Lost my wife 8 years back, fever season, before any of this. No children, thank whatever's listening. Nobody left who would have had to watch me get worse year on year, the way I watched myself get worse. Just me, and a body that kept asking more of itself than it had left to give, right up until this came along and gave some of it back. And before that, did anyone else try to help? The hall, a healer, anyone? Plenty tried. None of it took. Not really, not the way this does." His gaze drops, briefly, to the dead weight of his own legs beneath him. "Doesn't matter how it found me in the end. It's mine to keep doing now, whatever else is true about it. Go on. Understand all of it. It won't change what you're here to do." "It might," Senna says. "I'd like it to. Would you give it back, if our places were swapped?" He doesn't move from the doorway, doesn't invite them in, doesn't retreat either, just stands there, bracing against the frame, meeting her eyes with a directness that has nothing aggressive in it and everything exhausted. "Truly, look me in the eye and tell me you'd hand it back, knowing what it cost you to lose it." Senna doesn't have a clean answer for that, and the honesty of the silence that follows says more than anything she could have constructed to fill it. "What if there were another way?" she says instead, reaching for something, anything that isn't simply forced dressed up as conversation. "The Ashen Vow has healers, real ones, hall-trained, who work with bodies that have been broken a long time. I don't know if they could help you the way this armor does. I don't know that they couldn't either. I'd find out if you'd let me. I'd carry that question back myself, before anyone touches what's yours." Charity, Edrin says, and there's a bitterness in the word that's the closest he's come to real anger all evening. "I've had charity offered before. Healers who couldn't manage what 30 years underground did to a spine, priests who told me to be grateful for what I had left, neighbors who meant well and helped exactly nothing. I stopped believing in rescues a long time before this armor ever found me. I'm not interested in another one, however kindly you mean it. It wouldn't be a rescue, it would be an offer. You'd still get to say no. I'm saying no to the version standing in front of me right now, which is the only version that's actually real. Something in him hardens finally, the wariness curdling into something closer to resolve. You can carry whatever questions you like back to your hall. Carry this one too while you're at it. A man doesn't get to choose hope twice in one lifetime, and trust it'll hold both times. I already spent mine. Senna has nothing left to offer after that, and they both seem to know it in the same breath. I didn't think so, Edrin says quietly, and steps back from the doorway. Not fleeing, not yet, but reaching for something just inside it, with the weary, resigned economy of a man who has decided, against his own hope, how this evening is going to go. The armor comes alive around him in pieces. Brace by brace, a faint mechanical whir rising under the smell of herbs and oil, as plate finds plate, and his posture begins, gradually, to unfold itself toward something closer to whole. At the fence line, the others rise from their crouch without needing to be told. Weapons coming up slow and reluctant, none of them moving with anything like the readiness they'd carried into the Brass Feathers engine room. By the time he is fully braced, the wariness in his stance has hardened into something closer to readiness. Not aggression, not yet, just the simple, wary preparedness of someone who's run out of better options and intends to use the one he's got. I'm not looking for a fight, he says, but I'm not giving this up either. Not to strangers. Not to anyone. Neither am I, Senna says, low, more to herself than to him, and draws her sword anyway, because the conversation has plainly ended, and something else has begun in its place. Nah, what follows is not, by any measure, the party's grown used to, a fight in the way the Brass Feathers rigging was a fight. Edrin doesn't press an advantage, doesn't close distance, doesn't do anything that could be mistaken for hunting them. He simply braces in his own doorway, throws up a shimmering ward at the first overcommitted lunge, and holds his ground with the stubborn, defensive patience of a man protecting a threshold, rather than attacking anyone standing in front of it. Easy, Bram calls, more to the others than to their opponent, reading the shape of this immediately for what it is. He's not coming to us. Watch your distance. Don't crowd a cornered man into thinking he's got nothing left to lose. It's Orsa who notices, first, that they are not fighting in private. A curtain twitches in the cottage across the lane. A door cracks open just wide enough for a face to peer out before thinking better of it and withdrawing. By the second exchange, there are 3 separate windows lit with watching shapes. None of them bold enough to step outside, all of them plainly horrified by what they're seeing happen to a neighbor they've apparently known for years. An old woman 2 doors down doesn't even bother hiding her watching, stands square in her own doorway, arms folded, glaring at the 5 of them, with an open, unconcealed contempt that none of them can fully meet. They're watching, she says, low to no one and everyone. Let them, Bram says. Doesn't change what we came here to do. No, Orsa agrees, but it should weigh on us that it's happening where they can see it. A fight in an engine room is one thing. This is somebody's street. Nobody answers that, because there's no comfortable answer to give. And the fight continues under the unwelcome, helpless witness of an entire quiet lane. The ward flashes that answer every overcommitted strike carry a clean, ozone-bright smell that catches at the back of the throat, blue-white light skating across braced metal each time a blow lands somewhere it shouldn't. Edrin's breathing comes in short, clipped bursts between each defensive burst of motion, pained even with the armor's help, and every flinch of effort costs him something visible that none of them can quite look away from. Senna presses first, because pressing has always been her instinct, and because somebody has to start. Sword work careful and controlled, every strike aimed at disarming rather than wounding. And Edrin answers each one with a raised ward and a counter shove of force that sends her staggering back, a step without ever quite knocking her down. It isn't a fight so much as a negotiation conducted in increasingly desperate physical terms, neither side willing to be the one who escalates it past the point of return. We don't have to do this, Wick says, abruptly, surprising even himself with the conviction in it, surprising Senna more, given how rarely Wick volunteers an opinion on anything that isn't coin. He's circling at the fight's edge rather than committing to it, weapon drawn but unused, watching the exchange with an expression none of them have quite seen on him before. There's got to be another way through this that doesn't end with us taking a man's legs out from under him in his own doorway. Got a better idea, I'm listening. Bram says, ducking a glancing ward burst that catches his shoulder anyway, the sting of it visible in the brief tightening of his jaw. I don't know yet. I just know I've sold parts to men who needed them worse than any of you'd believe. That before any of this, and cutting somebody off from the only thing keeping them upright never once felt like a victory to the people doing the cutting. Geary can call this recovery all he wants. From where I'm standing, it looks like theft with better paperwork. Since when do you care this much? Bram asks, not unkindly, more genuinely curious than accusing, even mid-fight. Since always, probably. I just don't usually say so out loud. Wick ducks a straight arc of force, recovers, keeps circling. Had a partner, once, lost the use of his hand in a job gone wrong. Watched what happened to him after how fast everyone who'd called him useful stopped calling him anything at all. I don't get to fix that. I'd rather not be the reason it happens to somebody else if there's any way around it tonight. Then help me find something other than press until he breaks, Senna says, ducking under a defensive arc of her own, breathless. Because right now that's the only plan any of us actually has. Orso works the fight's other flank, Vine and Root called up through the packed dirt of the lane in slow, careful pulses meant to slow rather than harm, a tangle here to test his footing, a sneer there that he shrugs off with visible effort rather than violence. She's not trying to win either, not yet. She's testing, the same patient way she'd test any animal's reflexes, before deciding how hard to push, and what she finds doesn't comfort her. Every time the roots close around his ankle, she feels the armor fight back through them. Not him, she's certain of that much, but something in the metal itself bracing reflexively, the way a wary animal tenses before it's even decided to flee. It unsettles her more than she'd admit aloud that a thing built of brass and ward glass should carry that particular animal quality of wariness at all. He's not trying to win, she calls across the widening, awkward battlefield of a man's own front yard. He's trying to outlast us. Wear us down until we decide it's not worth the cost, and walk away. Might work too, Brom mutters, if we had anywhere else to be tonight. Brom tries pressing the advantage directly once, late in the exchange, driving in hard enough to test whether sheer weight of attack might simply overwhelm the ward faster than Edrin can rebuild it, and for one ugly half-second it nearly works, the shimmer flickering thin enough to show the strain underneath, before it snaps back to full strength and answers the counterburst that knocks Brim Proston here at Puctuinthanats Martup. Bram. Senna's voice cracks with real alarm, but he's already pushing himself back up, more annoyed than hurt, waving off the concern before it can fully form. I'm fine. That just confirms something, at least. He spits dirt, eyeing the cottage with new, grim respect. Brute force isn't the way through this. Whatever ward he's running, it rebuilds faster than we can break it down by hitting it harder. We need something cleverer than hitting it harder. Edrin, for his part, looks no happier about the exchange than Brom does, breathing hard against the door frame, one hand pressed briefly to his own ribs in a gesture that has nothing to do with injury, and everything to do with the simple cost of holding a ward that strong for this long. Neither side is enjoying the math of this fight, and both of them, in their own way, are running out of room to keep proving it. Working on cleverer, Tamsin calls back, though nothing about her voice suggests she actually has it yet. They don't, and the fight grinds on in exactly the uncomfortable register. None of them have a name for, yet, but will all recognize later as the worst kind of violence there is. The reluctant kind, performed by people who don't want to be performing it, against someone who doesn't want to be receiving it. Neither side able to find the door out before more damage gets done. Senna keeps pressing as the only path she can see toward ending this without anyone bleeding badly. Bram reads every defensive pattern with the same flat competence he'd bring to any fight, calling out the rhythm of Edrin's ward recovery time for the others to exploit. Orso works the edges with Vine and Root meant to slow rather than harm. Wick darts in and out without ever fully committing to a strike he doesn't actually want to land. More shadow than threat at this point. And Tamsin hangs back near the lane's edge, weapon barely rate-based. What heads a friction down at? She'd felt it the moment the first ward went up. Actually, a warmth threading up through her own scar that had nothing to do with exertion, distinct enough from anything Voss's rig or the brass feathers thruster had ever made her feel, that she'd nearly said something then and there, before deciding the middle of an opening exchange was no place to announce a feeling she couldn't yet explain to herself, let alone to the others. It builds with every ward flash since, quiet and insistent, less like alarm bells and more like a hand reaching toward hers in the dark and finding it already there. A ward burst catches Senna's exposed forearm at an unlucky angle, hard enough to leave a livid welt blooming beneath her sleeve, and she bites down on whatever sound that wants to become rather than let it out. Edrin flinches at having caused it, actually flinches, a full beat of visible regret crossing his face before the wariness reasserts itself. And for a moment the whole fight seems to hang on the question of whether that flinch means anything can still be salvaged here. Edrin, Bram tries, lowering his own weapon a fraction, voice pitched lower and steadier than the chaos around them seems to warrant. Nobody here wants this to end with you hurt. Stand down, talk to us properly, and we'll find some way through this that doesn't end the way it's currently headed. You don't get to offer me that and mean it, Edrin says, breathless, bracing again as another ward flares blue-white between them. Not while you're still standing in my yard with steel drawn. Talk's already failed once tonight. I'm not gambling on it twice. It doesn't. He braces again. The fight continues, and whatever small window Bram's attempt might have opened closes again just as fast as it appeared. The rhythm of ward and parry and careful, reluctant pressure resuming exactly where it left off. The exchanges that follow blur into a grinding, uncomfortable rhythm. None of them will remember cleanly afterward. Senna's blade turned aside again and again by shimmering force, Bram circling wide to test angles Edrin can't easily cover without overextending. Orsa's roots tightening and loosening around his ankles in slow, testing pulses. Wick darting close enough to threaten without ever quite committing. Every one of them performing a kind of violence that keeps looking, even mid-motion, for a door that refuses to open. It's mid-exchange, breath-ragged, one knee briefly buckling beneath a parry that costs him more than it should, that Edrin says the thing that will sit with every one of them long after tonight is over. You don't know what it's like, he says. Not shouted, not even particularly loud, just breathless and plain and devastating in exactly that plainness. To finally have a body that does what you tell it to. Nobody answers him. Nobody, in the moment, has anything that could possibly answer that, and the fight continues in a silence that's somehow louder than anything that came before it. Senna's next strike noticeably softer than the one before it. Bram's calls a half-beat slower. Even Orsa's vines pulling with less conviction than they had a minute ago, as though all five of them are quietly, separately recalculating what winning this is even supposed to feel like. Senna, more than any of them, feels the line lodged somewhere she can't easily dislodge it from. Her whole oath is built on a single, simple instinct, protect, and she has never once, in 4 years of training and 1 week of actual fieldwork, faced an hour where the instinct pointed in 2 directions at once and refused to resolve. Protect Edrin, who deserves a body that listens to him. Protect whoever this armor was meant to be recovered from harming, somewhere down a chain she still can't see the end of. She doesn't know, swinging her sword with less and less conviction by the second, which version of protecting she's actually managing right now, or whether either one counts. It's Tamsin who finally puts a name to what she's been feeling since the moment they arrived, calling it across the yard in a voice that cracks slightly under the weight of having to say it out loud at all. It's not wrong, she says. His armor, it doesn't feel wrong, the way the thruster did, the way Voss's rig did. It feels like recognition. Like something that knows what it's holding and is trying its best to hold it well. Useful, Bram says, ducking another word flash. But I need useful, in a shape I can act on, not a feeling. Tamsin closes her eyes for half a second, despite the danger of it, reaching past the noise of the fight toward whatever it is she's actually sensing, the way she'd reach toward a half-remembered word sitting just out of grasp. The shape of it assembles itself slowly, then all at once. There's a conduit, she says, the words coming faster now, running up his spine, under the main plates. That's where the whole system feeds from. I can feel it even from here, the way you'd feel a hot stove without touching it. Sever the flow there, properly, and the rest of it should go dark gently, limb by limb. Not all at once, not violently. It wouldn't hurt him. They would just stop. How do we get you close enough to try? Senna asks, already calculating, already hating the calculation, even as she makes it. You don't get me close, Orsa says, grim and decisive, already moving. You get him to turn his back. just for a moment. I can manage that much. What happens next happens fast, by necessity, because there's no version of this plan that survives slow execution. Orsa calls a tangle of root and bramble up through the packed dirt of the lane, with more force than she's used. All fight, catching Edrin's trailing foot mid-brace and pulling him a half-step forward and sideways, off the careful, threshold-guarding stance he's held the whole encounter. Just far enough, just long enough, that his back turns fully toward the yard, for the first time all evening. He catches himself almost immediately. The armor's reflexes faster than his own exhaustion, but almost immediately is not the same as immediately, and the gap is exactly as wide as it needs to be. Bram is already moving to intercept the defensive ward burst that answers the stumble, a reflexive, untargeted lash of force that would have caught Tamsin square in the chest had he not put his own forearm into its path instead, taking the glancing edge of it with a grunt he doesn't bother hiding. Wick, for his part, throws himself bodily into Edrin's eyeline at the worst possible moment for their target and the best possible moment for the party. A flash of motion and noise that buys exactly the half-second of distraction that matters. And Tamsin reaches him. Her hand finds the seam along the spine more by feel than sight, copper light tracing up from her own scarred forearm to meet brass and ward glass in a single careful touch, and the recognition she'd named only moments ago floods through her properly, now warm and aching and entirely unlike alarm, the unmistakable, bewildering sensation of touching something that, in some way she cannot yet explain even to herself, knows her back. It isn't a thought, exactly. It's closer to the feeling of a name almost remembered, gone again before she can hold it still long enough to read it. She doesn't have time to dwell on it. Edrin is already twisting, already trying to bring himself back around to face whatever's touched him, and there's perhaps one full second before the moment closes for good. She finds the flow, the way her instinct, more than her training, tells her to find it, and gently, not violently, not cruelly, just firmly, the way you'd close a valve rather than break a pipe, she stops it. The armor doesn't explode, doesn't spark, doesn't do anything dramatic at all. It simply goes dark, plate by plate, starting at the spine and spreading outward toward each limb in turn. First the shoulders, losing their faint internal glow all at once, then the long braces down each arm, then, last and slowest, the leg supports that have carried the bulk of his weight all evening. A dying mechanical whine fading beneath the sound of Edrin's own breath, catching as support he's leaned on for a full season disappears beneath him all at once. He goes down to one knee, then both, the fight ending not with a blow, but with the simple, gravity-driven collapse of a body no longer held up by anything but itself. Tamsin staggers back a step, her own legs unsteady beneath her, for reasons that have nothing to do with exertion, the copper scar along her forearm pulsing warm and slow even after the working's done, like an after-image that doesn't want to fade. Nobody moves to strike the final blow that isn't coming. Nobody says anything triumphant, because there's nothing in this particular ending that feels like triumph to any one of them. Senna lowers her sword slowly, the relief of the fight ending, and the horror of how it ended arriving in the same breath, indistinguishable from each other. Bram lets his own stance ease, rubbing absently at the forearm that took the ward burst meant for Tamsin, his expression giving away nothing, and his eyes giving away everything. Wick simply stands very still, weapons still drawn, still unused the entire fight through, looking at the slumped dark armor like he's trying to decide whether what just happened counts as the better outcome he'd been arguing for, or merely a gentler version of the same theft. "Are you hurt?" Senna asks finally quietly, kneeling at a careful distance. "No," Edrin says, and his voice is gone hollow in a way that's somehow worse than anger would have been. "Just tired. The way I used to be tired before." Nobody has anything to say to that either. And the quiet that follows is the kind that costs something just to sit inside of. They don't linger longer than the work actually requires. The dead armor gathered, wrapped, accounted for. Every motion conducted with a gentleness that has nothing to do with tactics anymore, and everything to do with 5 people who'd rather not look too closely at what they've just done. Edrin doesn't resist any of it. He sits where he fell, back against his own doorframe, watching them work with the flat, exhausted stillness of a man who's already spent everything he had on the fight that mattered and has nothing left over for this part. At the fence line, waiting their turn to leave, the others say little, each of them processing the same hour in entirely different registers. Bram stands with his arms crossed, watching the dark cottage with the particular stillness of a man filing this evening away, somewhere he won't easily reach again without meaning to. Orsa crouches, near the disturbed earth where her roots tore through the lane, smoothing the dirt back into something closer to undisturbed. A small, private act of tidying that has nothing to do with covering tracks, and everything to do with not wanting to leave the ground looking the way the fight left it. Wick sheathes a weapon he never once used, turning the whole encounter over with an expression that keeps almost settling into words and then abandoning them. "I don't feel like we won anything," he says finally, to no one in particular. "We didn't," Orsa says, not unkindly. "We just made sure nobody died finding that out. Is that supposed to be better? It's not supposed to be anything. It just is what it is." Orsa straightens, brushing dirt from her hands. "You argued for a better way the whole fight." "There wasn't one, in the end. Not one we found in time, anyway. That doesn't make the arguing worthless. It just means the world didn't hand you the ending you were asking for." Wick doesn't answer that, but something in his shoulders settles a fraction, the particular relief of being told, by someone whose good opinion he's quietly come to value more than he'd ever admit, that trying and failing still counted for something. Tamsin, still a few steps off, hasn't said anything since the armor went dark, her own arms wrapped around herself against a chill that has nothing to do with the night air. Bram notices first, crossing to stand near her without quite crowding her. "You all right? I don't know what I felt, touching that conduit." She says it quietly, almost confessional, like the words have been sitting too heavy to hold alone any longer. "It wasn't like anything I've felt before, not from any of the gear we found so far. I keep wanting to call it kinship, and I don't have any idea why that's the word that keeps showing up, or what it would even mean if it's the right one." "Maybe it doesn't mean anything yet," Bram says. "Maybe it's just a feeling you're allowed to sit with until it does. That's not very comforting." Wasn't trying to be comforting. Was trying to be honest. A faint, almost smile, brief and not unkind. "You'll tell us when you're ready." Same as everyone else on this job seems to be working out their own version of that lately. It's Senna who lingers longest at the doorway itself, crouched near enough to speak quietly, the rest of the party already gathering at the edge of the lane to give them what privacy the moment can still afford. "For what it's worth," she says, "I am sorry." "That's not nothing, and I know it's not enough, but I won't pretend it's nothing either." "Sorry doesn't carry water from a well," Edrin says, without real venom in it, just plain tired fact. "But I believe you mean it. That's more than some would manage. What will you do now?" "What I did before all this." "Manage." "I managed 30 years without it. I expect I'll manage again, however much I'd rather not have to relearn the shape of that." He says it without self-pity, the same flat, exhausted honesty he's carried through the whole evening. "Don't trouble yourself over it more than you already are. You've got a long ride back, and a man who sent you, and I expect he's got better answers waiting than I do." "I became a paladin to protect people," Senna says, quieter now, more to herself than fully to him. "I'm not entirely sure tonight counts, whichever way I look at it." "Maybe it counts as something in between," Edrin says. And there's no comfort in it, just a tired, honest shrug at the shape of an answer neither of them can finish. "Worse than nothing. Better than the alternative. I don't know what you call that. I don't think I've got a name for it either. It's not an absolution, and Senna doesn't take it as one. But it's not condemnation either, and in the careful, exhausted space between those two things, she finds something she can almost, barely, carry back out through his garden gate with her. She rises, finally, and turns to go, and that's when his voice catches her at the edge of the lane, the bewilderment in it, sharper now than anything that came before, like a question he's only just allowed himself to actually ask. "He said Sterling didn't care anymore," Edrin calls after her, slumped in his doorway, the dark and silent armor heaped beside him like something already mourned. "He said I could keep it. Why would he say that if it was never true?" Senna stops. Doesn't turn around, not at first, the question landing somewhere she has no ready answer for, and isn't sure she wants one yet. Who said that to you? She asks finally, carefully, half turning back. But Edrin only shakes his head, some last reserve of caution or exhaustion closing the door on the answer before it can fully open. Doesn't matter now, I suppose. Just go on. You've got what you came for. The five of them walk back through Wrenhollow's quiet, lamplit lane in a silence none of them particularly wants to break. Behind them, the watching windows have gone dark one by one, neighbors retreating from whatever they witness without ever once stepping outside to intervene or to comfort. Ahead, the road back to Aetherglen waits, longer tonight than it felt, on the way in. The question hangs unanswered behind them in the dark. He, small and dangling, and entirely unidentified, the kind of word that means nothing at all on a first pass, and will mean rather more, to anyone paying close enough attention the second time it's heard.